we going to talk about that, or is it Jason?
I can start, so.
Jason, okay.
Just going off of our last meeting in June, we walked into kind of our why, what, and how, that supporting document. Since we met, we did make it available or notice the public via our website that we're navigating the 2 book adoptions that they were available in our main office. Those materials have been available. I think we're officially 2 days short of 30 days. They've been available since the next day. And I checked with Jody Pop, who works up front this morning. And as of this morning, at approximately 9:30 a.m., we've had 0 folks come and ask to look at those materials. And so I'd like to just spend time today just answering any questions that we have. And then ultimately, we're looking for support to move both these book adoptions forward to the full board for consideration.
Can we take them both at the same time for approval, you think, or move them forward? Or do you guys want to do them separately?
Actually, I had a quick question. How's the public notified about these?
Yeah, so I think 2 ways, really. One is through the minutes of the curriculum committee that goes through the full board. And then I believe we met last time on June 21st.
Okay.
Then the morning of the 22nd of June, we put a news release on our website.
Mm-hmm.
And that currently posted. So,
Yeah, it was on the home page, I think.
yes,
I remember seeing it.
Is that still on there?
I believe so. I can check that.
Yeah, would you send me a link to that if it's there? And I'm sorry if I think I had some technical difficulties the last meeting. I think you guys may have talked about that prior to me jumping on, so, or me getting through those technical issues, so I just wanted to better understand that process. And
It is on there, and I'll send you the link.
okay, great. And how does that work? I know it sounds like no one's really come in to view the materials, but how does that process work? If someone came in to view it, is it just they have to like read the whole book while they're there, or can you help me understand how that would typically flow?
And we do ask that the materials stay on premise,
Okay.
but there's no time frame, right? So folks can come and take a look at those, peruse those materials, and for any given length of time. If they have questions, Jody is the person at the front. She knows that she should contact Pam or myself, and then we can answer any questions that come up.
Okay. And I guess the other question I have is, is that really a practical way to go about it? I was, that could take, depending on how big the book is, right? That could take some time to get through everything and review it. So it sounds like no one's really come in yet to review this, but what do you think is an adequate amount of time for people to review a book like that?
The actual time to go through the textbook, I would be guessing. I'm not real comfortable at guessing.
Yeah.
And so that's why we made it available for 30 days.
Right.
And there's no time frame, right? So if someone wanted to spend multiple days or multiple hours doing that, they're certainly, that would be available to them. But I'd be guessing about how long it would take.
Right. Oh yeah, that's why I was just thinking out loud, because I talked to a peer earlier today about the issue, and I know for me personally, like I'd love a chance to at least look at it right before I just rubber stamp this thing, and I didn't even really, because I missed that part of the meeting earlier last month. I haven't had a chance to do that, so.
I guess I'll speak. So have we purchased a single copy? Is that correct?
Just one, yeah.
So I think what he's trying to get at is there a way we could put like a watermark on it and then put it online saying that for review only, so that you couldn't, so we wouldn't have to worry about purchasing of the whole set. Obviously, we probably only purchase 20 books or 10 books, probably one classroom set, not even maybe. And then probably the online content of it for the teacher to have their own instructional manual, I'm guessing. But is there some way that we could have a a review process for that to be digitalized. Is kind of what he's getting at, I think. Is that what the spirit of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think just making it easier for people to access it, right? For me personally, right, if you're saying as a board member that the only time I can get to it is, when the administrative office is open, that's kind of inconvenient. And I would imagine for a lot in our community, that might be inconvenient for people that work during the day. So just in the spirit of transparency, again, I think it might be worth a conversation to at least think about how we might improve that going forward, just to ensure that everyone that would like to take a look at it at least has a chance to do so.
Yeah, I would have to investigate this, but I believe if we wanted to make an electronic copy available, we would have to purchase that, but I would have to investigate.
Yeah, that was one of my thoughts, is like there's probably some copyright issues and so forth. So.
Right.
But there may be available links to online, who knows?
Jim, you got any thoughts on that?
Well, a couple of things that I just thinking about without, understanding and following this to this point in time is, I'm curious too, in terms of if there's any reviews from various groups, that are available too, that starts highlighting, maybe some of the things, in there too, that might be available. But outside of physical time about reviewing that, I would be challenged to think, okay, how much time is it going to take me to read through a textbook, or some type of a book, to read that, versus getting the Cliff Note versions about, how might that inform me, even though we're going through our own review process and stacking it up against others, so we're trying to do, I'm guessing, side-by-side comparisons of those that have rose to the top relative to the return. We typically look at what that return is, recognizing there's other issues out there, that one, wants to be aware of. So it'd be new for me too, to, just thinking in terms of going forward here, what other ways can we increase accessibility?
Isn't the current map book that we're looking at too, just a revision of another one that we currently use?
It's a new edition of a book.
So, is there something maybe that the company supplies that are the alterations? Like, what are the revisions for the new books that even having that part that can be seen? So, I know right now, I don't think it's going to change this particular map book, but moving forward, maybe that's something we could look at. It's something we've already adopted, and we're just looking at a new revised copy that we just get to see the revisions that are being made. It'd be less to look through and maybe a whole textbook. I wouldn't want to read a math text personally, but so. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I just think that, I'm not a publishing company, but obviously I understand they don't want to release it, but I think that they give, like guides or handbooks to potential customers to say, hey, here's our product. Would you like to buy it moving forward? And, as a district, we're saying, well, we would like to kind of transition to a digital preview for, our community to review before we approve it. That's kind of what we're saying. And maybe not in this particular instance, but moving forward, I think that's a standard practice that with technology nowadays, I think that's pretty, not too much to ask for our community to see. I think that's what we're saying there.
I think too, because we're the ones who are okaying it, maybe future-wise, not right now, but it's something we can consider as allowing whatever curriculum committee there is to see it first and to go through that maybe before we say, yeah, let's move it on, because we haven't seen it. Not that I've been in the last 30 days, though. So, but before we get that first okay, maybe we did have a chance to see some of that stuff too before it comes before the board, before our committee. Just a thought. Adding another profit, as in another step, I know, but I think we give board members more confidence moving forward with the textbook.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, my apologies for the technical issues last month, so I just really kind of am behind the ball on reviewing this, but it is a lot to digest too, right? So I just want to kind of glance through it personally, just to make sure that if I'm stamping it, saying, yeah, this is good, that I at least look at it.
And you can still do that. It is out in the office. So you should be able to do that in the next week before it comes to the full board. And you could always, if you had an issue with it, Tony,
Yeah.
you could always pull that item out at the next board meeting.
Okay.
So, you know, as consent agenda, when she asks, you pull that item out for discussion.
Sure. And I take it you guys only have one copy of each, is that right?
At this time, yes.
Okay. So would it be feasible, for me to, do I have to be at the office physically, or could I just grab it and like read it when I'm out of town?
We ask that it stays here in case there's someone else that wants to take a look at it.
Okay. All right, yeah, I think that's something that we just need to think more about in the long haul. You know, how do we, again, what if there was a lot of people that wanted to review it, and then, you know, again, I guess that didn't really happen for this particular set of books that we're looking at now, but if it did happen, then, you know, it'd be kind of difficult. And then again, just thinking about people that might work second shift or third shift, you know, it might be hard for them to, or first shift rather, it might be hard for them to come in, right? If they're working a 9 to 5 or whenever the district office is open.
Do they sell a digital copy of the book? Okay, so we're actually just asking questions that, you know, we want to be able to we want to be able to present to the community, not just a physical copy at district office, but if we could somehow, you know, potentially buy a digital copy and then have it, you know, watermarked so that we wouldn't be trying to, you know, display it. That's something moving forward that we would ask. You know, I think that's what we're kind of getting at, right? I mean, that's what we're trying to, with technology nowadays, I don't think that's too much to ask. I think it's almost a requirement so that we can have our community see it, not just physically in the building in the middle of summer. You know. That's just what I think I'm hearing from everyone here.
This is technology, we're good if we can.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, with that, is there any more questions that you have about the actual book or the process or anything like that?
Lee Tennis, do you recommend this book?
Yes, yeah, and the team of teachers that got together and compared them amongst the other texts in that area for both the accounting and the math. They both came highly recommended by our professionals.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly too, I don't know if you got this part or not, Tony, but the team looked at it and they looked at various sources for a math book and came back to the same publisher and same set of like books that they had before with the confidence that it was what they needed. So.
Yeah, I also think the paperwork that you got also distinguished some of their commentary around the comparison between the different books too. So it kind of lends you a little bit of insights as to why the team landed on that book.
The connection to the state standards. Yeah. Those are, I mean, paper copies with that, I'm sure you have electronic as well.
Yeah, so if there aren't any more questions or discussion, do I have a motion to move it forward to the board?
I'll make a motion for the full board.
I'll second that motion, but I would like to know in the future, I'd like more time to review, and just to review this process to see if we can increase the transparency.
You can add that to the minutes.
Thank you.
Great. I guess all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Next, we have the accounting book adoption. Same type of process. And if I remember correctly, I'll just add that part of the reason we're going with this, it actually puts us kind of ahead of schedule because it's the technical college and UW-Manitowoc.
Lakeshore Technical College and then NWTC as well.
Okay.
And so this particular textbook is the one that they use, and our courses are transcripted credit. So if our students at Lincoln High School take this accounting course and receive, I think it's a B or better, they get the transcripted credit to LTC. And so they use this textbook, but they have, there's a new edition coming out. They told us they're going to the new edition, so we're just a half a step ahead of them, but it's the same curriculum and textbook that they use, which really ultimately helps our alignment with that curriculum and their confidence in, the curriculum that our kids are getting and getting the credit from that institution. So
Any questions about that? Okay, then I will look for a motion to forward this to the board.
I'll make a motion as well.
Matthew first,
Second.
Tony second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, so there we go, we both have them approved to go to the full board.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Again, we'll make note via the minutes about the electronic recommendation for the future. Well,
I'm very excited about the accounting book, I think that's great. Okay, next on our list is, we're going to work with the personal communication devices template with policies, basically cell phones.
Academic standards.
Pardon? Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped it, yep. We'll go backwards, not backwards where we were supposed to be, the 2022 copy of Act 55, which is the academic standards memo.
So we are annually required to have the board do an adoption of our standards, and so the document you were provided has a link to the standards. The only change from last year is a recommendation from our 912 music folks. They would like to be able to align their work to Wisconsin Music Education Association standards instead of the Wisconsin Music Standards, the state standards, because of the fact that they feel like those Wisconsin Music Education Association standards are more descriptive and more rigorous, and it really reflects the work that they do with students. They're very similar in terms of their nature, but they provide them with more description in terms of the qualities that they're looking for in music performance with students and engagement with music. And then also, they felt like the rigor is a little more descriptive in there as well. And so they have had a request as they were going through their power standard process and looking at how their work aligns to power standards. They felt like that was a better match to them. So they had requested that we bring that forward as just a change, but everything else is the same as what it has been last year.
Any questions about the standards?
Where do these standards come from, or is this TPI driven, or is this?
Many of them are the state standards, yes. The exceptions would be for science. You'll see the next generation standards, science standards, and that was because our district actually adopted the next generation science standards before the state adopted their new science standards, which they are aligned to the next generation science standards. And so our 612 group has continued to work in alignment with the next generation standards, and because there's so much similarity, there wasn't really a recommendation for a need to change. But everything else, Tony, is aligned to the standards, the state standards.
What do you guys think about the state standards?
And so,
I mean, do you think they're good standards, or?
they vary in terms of their usability, I would say, for our teachers, and they're getting better. They do a revision process, so they go through a regular cycle of revision. And so as they do those revisions, they take public input, and they also take input from the staff that work with them. So for example, right now, I believe the career and tech ed standards are, right now, the state is taking feedback on current standards, and they will use that information as they start to plan for how they may make revisions to what's going to be for the future. And so over time, I think they've gotten better to have the standards that those frameworks that they put out be more descriptive and more easily implementable into the classrooms. So math, for example, just underwent a recent adoption, much more descriptive than they were in previous years, and that's just the nature of getting better.
Yeah, I was looking at that one, it's like 239 pages, so it's a lot of info. Jim, what do you think about the standards that are out there?
Well, I'm not as tuned in right now to the current state standards. I recall the progression of, at one point in time, there was the Common Core, right? That was setting the standards, then it went back to Wisconsin in 1 year, which established its own standards, because of response. Then with some change in government, it went back to, I think we're probably adopting, close to a national standard again. Correct, so they evolve over time. The one thing I'm not as familiar with is the one that you just mentioned, Next Generation. Where does that standard come from?
Those are national.
National, so it's a national versus, in typically, does the state come to adopt a particular one or two?
I think that the state modeled, so they've modeled many of their standards after the Common Core. That's where the source of many of theirs have been. And the Next Generation science standards, like I said, came prior to the state kind of doing a review and adoption of their new science standards a few years ago. And so they modeled it after the Next Gen standards because of the fact that that was such a draw and so many educators were already using them. And it was a nice system to model after because it gave, again, that description for teaching and learning, which is really.
What is the option if you weren't adopting a state standard, or is that a requirement?
It's not a requirement.
So we would have to have something in place of,
Right.
Yes.
in most school districts, would be aligning themselves to the state standards.
Yes.
Yes.
Tony, I think you bring up a great point, the depth of those documents. And that's the work of, that's the many things that we ask our professionals to dig into. And so, you ask, what do we think of it? What I would say is that I think the standards set on a great foundation of where to start, right? And our professionals are continuing to dig into these standards, to understand them, to identify power standards, to identify supporting standards, and then think about how that work translates into the daily work with students. And so it's work, but our professionals are doing that challenging work, and they're doing it phenomenally. And to make another connection, if we take a look at the math book adoption and the accounting book adoption, you see that very work coming through this, right? Those folks took a look at the standards as a starting point. They identified priority standards, they call them this document, supporting the standards, and that really serves as the foundation for not only the daily work of our students, but things like book adoptions. And it's daunting, that 237 pages, it's daunting, but that's the work our professionals are really diving head first into, and we should be really proud of it.
It's one thing to remember too, that when we teach these standards, it also aligns with the testing that our state does too. So that when we, so that they're prepared for taking those exams.
Thank you. I was actually about to segue into that. So these standards are, it sounds like, used then for the testing that comes out, which then we get that data back, right, all the DPI numbers and all that. Which leads me to my next question. I think we had at one point some discussion about how, although useful, this may not give us the full picture. And I thought I had this conversation with you guys. I had it with somebody, but again, just to talking about standards, would it be worthwhile to have a discussion on developing our own standards, here in the MPSD, or just another way to measure our progress if the data from the DPI isn't giving us the full picture, or could be improved upon. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I know your question. I think I would go back to what Jim just highlighted, that we are not mandated to adopt these standards. But if we wanted to look at something different, we would have to allocate time, resources, and professional development to work through the identification of those standards. And if we wanted to prioritize that, we would just have to think about the implications and again, the time and resources that it would take.
And some other distinguishing factors here, again, remember, I'm kind of, in terms of don't have the depth of background as our curriculum people here would have. But the standards is not the curriculum. The curriculum is what we choose, which is textbook material, what we teach, you know, the various resources we have to meet standards. So standards are an expectation. I mean, this gets very, very complex. It's important, and I would just put it out there because, you know, sometimes people will not adopt certain textbooks, okay? So, I mean, some of this sometimes comes down to that. So how do you really understand what you're approving sometimes, you know, for a layperson or a board member, you have to get out there. But it's important to understand the standards are an expectation. We then determine what curriculum will be able to meet that standard as well as what we want our kids to achieve. You also can then put into what your assessment becomes critical because the assessment identifies the level of rigor of that standard. So you could have you could have a low assessment being a very simple response and you're meeting the minimum requirements of meeting that standard, but that may not be what you need to pass the ACT or to score high in the ACT or something of that nature. So there's a lot of, you know, implication in terms of wherever you're at in terms of how these things all go on. But you're right, we don't have to adopt them with, you know, with that clarity. The work involved in doing that, because typically what happens is whether or not the state or national, the first way that standards are come in place is they try to figure out who's top in the field of mathematics. You know, and they come together, not right or wrong, it's their minds that are coming together, and then likewise that starts getting shared down to our professionals to make a similar assessment, sometimes not maybe with the same knowledge base. But again, there's an awful lot in a particular standard that is being put out there for kids to learn. And you know, how does a layperson understand what that is? You know, to make informed decisions in terms of you know, in terms of what we want our kids to learn and to be able to do and to get into college and some other things. So there's a lot involved, you know, into this whole process. I think it's meaningful to start looking in terms of ways to maybe surface more information, you know, on that. But it is a lot of work. It's really deep. I mean, the one criticism about education, and you heard Jason indicate power standards. You know, we're recognizing there's no way that you're going to gain all those standards. It's kind of a set of parameters, correct? And we identify what's the most critical even in there. So we're trying to even prioritize our work, and that sometimes is where our curriculum will be. So I recognize and support the need to be able to, as lay people, make informed decisions about knowing in terms of the rigor of our work, the content of our work, you know, and that we're making informed decisions in our by our elected officials here in terms of approving, you know, some things. There isn't a simple answer to the alternative outside of probably a lot more work.
Well, I guess in layman's terms too, it's more about we're trusting our professionals, our teachers, who determine which standards are the most important and picked ones, say for math, out of that 241 pages that they're going to try to teach throughout the year, right? I mean, that's really what it boils down to. And everyone then can be on the same page, teaching toward the same things, and have boundaries and objectives and goals and all those different things. Otherwise, it's just kind of free willy-nilly, anybody can teach anything, so.
I'll try to explain this to my best ability. So like with career and technical education, like the standards are the foundation of what we're trying to potentially, you know, have our kids learn eventually. But how we get to a standard can be done many different ways. Right. And we can't even sometimes even get more than a couple standards. So what ends up happening, Tony, is that the standards keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But then it's the task of the educator to try to see the standards as like a foundational roadmap, and then through the curriculum, we try to dive into a couple here and there. Where the wiggle is, which you might be more concerned about, is how, like, it never used to be called career technical education, it was called tech ed, but now they put career in there because they're trying to base it like more so on STEM, so science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So they're always trying to determine that, hey, my elective is important and I need to be involved as well with the education process. So like they're kind of always fighting over ground, so that's why sometimes they get reviewed and changed to try to align more with science, technology, engineering, math. So that's kind of the battleground of trying to figure out why the elective is as important as the others. So sometimes the standard can't even define how important an elective really is. So that's where they have to keep on reviewing and try to have that foundation of meaning of why we're educating towards that standard. So a standard is just like the big picture, and then how we get there is through the choice of the curriculum that we're implementing. And you're never going to hit all the standards. But it's like you always align to a standard when you're trying to teach something.
And I think you made a good point, Matthew, about that review process, because they're the groups that come together to establish the standards and then review and update the standards are the experts in the field. So they're bringing together people that are at the top of their field in terms of understanding it. So math was math experts from around the state coming together. For career and technology education, it will be experts from that area. And part of that is to be responsive to what are the new practices that we're seeing are growing in terms of helping build our capacity to understand these content areas. In career and technology education, it's looking at what are those things that are important to our local manufacturers and our local business people. And how do we make sure that as a part of that standards review process, we're updating to that. And so those folks coming together is an extensive process, typically takes quite a large amount of time. So an undertaking by a district to write their own would be monumental. And it just isn't heard of for that reason, because trying to find those experts who can come together and bring all that knowledge together and then work through this extensive development and review process and collecting feedback is just very, very time consuming.
We're putting together, the student learning office is putting together a resource for our new teachers. We know that we have a great number of new folks to our learning community at the start of the year. And one of the slides that we're putting together is, I think, a really simple chart I'll share with the team that shows that we're really starting with standards, right? And we're really asking our teams, the algebra team or the third grade team, to really take a look at those standards, understand them, prioritize them, and that becomes the learning targets that we talked about in the classroom, right? So from the standards, understanding the standards, understanding the resource we use, those becomes those daily learning targets. What do we want students to know today? And that then leads to assessments, right? Our learning targets lead to the assessments. And so then we capture what our students are learning. And then from those assessments, we want our professionals to talk about this group has got it, this group does not have it, what are we going to do about it? This group has really got it, what are we going to do to push them forward? So it's a cyclical nature, starting with that roadmap that we call standards. Now I'll share this research. It's a one-pager. I think it really does just a nice job of kind of showing that road, that cyclical nature. And we're going to share it with the teachers and others.
I like one page.
Yeah.
Simple.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to have a lot of the meat behind it, but if we could, to Jim's point, explain to lay people, right? So we get it.
I don't want to, because I really want to make sure that we all recognize the importance of getting business done and moving things, otherwise we can create a bottleneck really quick. At the same time, I just want to recognize the questioning is very valid, because I'll take something that we might all relate to. At one point in time with literacy, there was a theory that we didn't need the phonics. And so we kicked it out. And then that evolved to balanced literacy. And all of a sudden now new research is suggesting there's holes. So there is a reason for us questioning it, and even in layman terms, something that becomes very complex, to really create an awareness that mistakes can still be made even with the experts. I don't know how we get Aaron Stoker around that, but I shared that in terms of these questions are good, but it is a very challenging thing to recognize the alternative is do it all yourself. And that is a costly, very much so. And, I mean, good intentions about picking the experts, even though sometimes experts might be aligned with the theory, right? I mean, so, I just throw that out because this question is really important, and that we continue to do what we can to engage, our public, so that they feel comfortable that we are doing our due diligence and questioning and examining but the alternative is equally challenging, and we could err significantly there too.
If I could just add on to that real quick, thanks for that, Jim. Looking at what I envision us moving towards at some point is having some sort of an ongoing dashboard, right? That we could, share with the community to show them our progress in the key areas that are ultimately going to drive the academic achievement we all want, right? Or improvement that we all want. And at one point I had a conversation with, and I've had this conversation with a few folks in the district about, just looking at the overall accountability scores that are put forth by the DPI and how that's not a perfect measure, like it's not giving us the full picture. So maybe the standards may not have been, the standards may be fine, right? Maybe it's just how do we capture and measure, the things that are going to cause the results to improve. That's really what I'm interested in. I want to leave it to you guys as the experts to help us figure that out. But if we can, move in that direction in the long term, tweak here and there if we need to. I don't want to reinvent the wheel, but I just want to, give you guys some insight into my thought process and how hopefully we can use that if we get the right dashboard built. It's going to give us better visibility on our progress throughout the year versus, once a year when we get an exam back, right, or wherever the test results are.
Just email the team that one sheet for your reference.
Okay, any more questions or discussion? All right, with that, I am seeking a motion to move forward the 2022 copy of Act 55, the academic standards memo, to the full board.
I'll make a motion.
Okay,
I'll second it.
okay, all in favor? Aye. Right, the motion carries. All right, now we're on to the personal communication devices company, better known as, to me, the cell phone policy. So we did have a first reading with the full board. We thought thoroughly discussed this, and to give you that history again, after the first read, we had an administrator to come forward with some questions and some concerns over what we had decided. And then I took it to the ad hoc committee for discussion to see what they had to think. And there are some recommendations coming out of the ad hoc committee, which, by the way, we hadn't talked about before this. We were the first ones to talk about it. So we have some recommendations on the ad hoc that we would really like to see. And also furthering, the administrators had some more discussion about it too. Ironically, we probably thought of it in more of a freer terms for our kids than the administration did. But I'll just wait until Jason gets back. So the number one thing was, if you will go down to, let's see here, I think it's number 8. So
Sorry, Kathy.
No, go
Please
ahead.
highlight again, who you spoke to and what groups of people you spoke to get this input.
Sure. Well, we had all made our decisions. Then it went, there were some conversations with administrators, with different board members afterwards, one of them being Lance Masters. And also, I know that Corey and Anna had their own discussion and emailed me some of the things that they talked about. We also have Katie Eichmann is part of the ad hoc committee, so she gave her some of her recommendations. These two, were you at the one that we talked about, the cell phone? One of you guys, I think, was there. Maybe not. Maybe that was the week you weren't. You weren't. So I guess you guys weren't there. But we have had a few different administrators there, and then of course the ad hoc student behavior advisory committee, and they're the ones who gave us a lot of the recommendations. Those are made up of former teachers and current staff. So we have everyone from special ed to math and elementary and high school. It really covers like the full gamut of our district. So we had a very long discussion about it, actually, it took over an hour, and it took up most of our meeting that day. And they came up with a couple of recommendations, so that are slight changes, and only slight, to what we came up with for our meeting. The first one, as I said, I think it's the 8th, I won't say paragraph, it's a line, but I think it's, 1, 2, 3. It's the one line, yeah, after PCDs actually, that says students shall have no expectation of confidentiality with respect to their use of, they call them PCDs, on school premises or property. What we would like to see as a group was, and I'm saying we as an ad hoc right now, is that that line become either underlined, made bold, italicized, but have more prominence within the text of the policy, and also to be duplicated, but to be made like immediately under the personal communication devices. So it's almost like the first line. So it would be in there twice. It needs to be in there twice because the first part you see it there, it follows along with the previous paragraph. So it makes sense that it's in that portion. But rather than it being the first line right now, is students may use PCDs before and after school, during their lunch break, in between classes, as long as they do not create distraction. It like shows a lot of latitude, and the group would like to see like, look, you can use this, but just know there's some accountability with that. And so it makes an accountability sentence right from the beginning. So that's why we would like to see it twice and then bolded. Yeah, Tony?
So does this version that says draft and board book, is that the one that's got the edits that you're talking about?
So I'm not looking at board book, but the paper copy that is handed you is what went to the full board for the first read. What Kathy is bringing forward is a recommendation stemming from the ad hoc committee, which is not reflected on this.
Right, and there's two versions of this in board book, and I'm asking, so none of those versions in board book are what you're saying, right?
No,
Okay.
that is accurate.
No, so this version that he just handed us is
Gotcha.
the copy that the three of us decided as a group on and forwarded to the board.
Okay.
But then since then, we were kind of made aware of some of the, which is part of, by the way, part of the purpose in a first and second read is that if some things come to light, you have a period of time that you can make some of those changes. So that's essentially what happened, is some people spoke up and said, hey, I'd like to see some things that are different. And so I went to ad hoc, first of all, to be, it's a body of teachers and administrators. I felt it was a good place to have that discussion with them. So that is one of the key points. To me, it's pretty minor as far as a change would be made. It's very easy, I think, for Neola to do that, to add that in. But I think it's a very important piece, because a lot of times if you're talking about having, we like those one pagers, right? A lot of times you don't get anyone reading the whole thing. You only have a chance sometimes to have those first couple of sentences read. And we felt as though that was a key part of it, is to like make students aware that, you know, there's some boundaries. It kind of says that right in the beginning, where before the first sentence kind of sounds like it's kind of, I don't want to say willy-nilly, but it sounds like, oh, we can kind of have them all the time if you don't really read the whole thing through. Does that make sense? Just mentally.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how did that read again, the language they wanted to add?
It's the same thing that's down here. It's like right below the paragraph that starts with PCDs. So it's about
Okay.
8 below. So it's just a one-line sentence that says students shall have no expectation of confidentiality with respect to their use of PCDs on school premises and private property. We certainly have to honor confidentiality, but the idea behind that is if someone is doing something that is seemingly unlawful or inappropriate, that the students recognize that it may be something that may be asked for to be seen.
Okay.
So we'd like to see that duplicated up, like as a first sentence. I think no matter what, we need to have personal communication devices, like what that is, the PCDs, that needs to be first. But underneath that, if we could have that a second time.
Okay, so this is an editing process, so.
Yeah, it's
all you
about a little
really
bit of
need to
editing.
do- I mean, so we can, we want to vote on every one of them, or you want to say one at a time, or we can go through this one by one if you'd like, and then we can direct them how we'd like to move forward.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot, it's really just a couple, so let's just like say what you're thinking right now with that, and if you
I'm fine
have
with that,
issues
yeah.
with that.
If the administrators think that's a good idea, I think we should do it.
And also parents, we have parents on that group too, and actually it was a parent who brought it up, so. Do you have any issues with that, Jim?
No, I didn't, personally, I thought it was just recognizing that there's consequences sometimes if you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, and I
Right.
just wanted to make sure that students were aware of that, right away.
Yes.
Possible by highlighting that, that's what I think the
Yeah.
intent here is.
Yeah, those are exactly, again, because sometimes you don't get everyone reading the full body, and at least you can kind of hit them with a pow in the beginning. That makes any sense. So, okay, so as long as you guys are okay with that,
That's fine.
that's what our recommendation will be then. Jason, are you writing this then,
I am.
and then it'll be brought forward to the board that way? Is
We'll
that
bring it
how
as
this
a
works?
first read again,
Okay.
to the next board meeting, yes.
So it'll start over as if your first read? I would not forget that.
Susan, edit.
Okay,
If I might just clarify, in terms of, you mentioned two documents, just to make sure, so when we have the two documents in the board book, the first one is what we get from Neola, that says we kind of worked through this policy, and here are some options that we feel are reasonable for you to consider. The second one is what we decided, and then what we're discussing now is a few more edits
Right.
to that second one. One, the template is the Neola, the draft was where you last left it, and this is now some additional.
You should really have three, not to muddy the water. We provided what we have on the current
Oh, your current,
website,
yeah.
right?
Right.
What's actually,
Right.
Right.
And it's
Which
just
makes
that-
sense.
Yep, the middle, I think it was a chart, the middle column was the template.
Yeah.
With the
Which was the-
brackets and parentheses provided by Neola, and then the third column was what this team
Right.
decided. And so we would put together that chart again, and probably add a fourth column for this one, right, saying this is after. We'll clear it up with, for the full board, really, right?
and now I'm looking for my spot on here, so I'm looking for it on the new paper you just handed me. But there's another part that we thought should probably be considered bold. So when we, as a group, when we looked through this, we chose option B from Neola's policy to work with. And option B in the first paragraph has a sentence that says, use of PCDs except those approved by a teacher or administrator at any other time is prohibited, and they must be powered completely off, i.e. not just placed into vibrate or silent mode and stored out of sight. That sentence was also one we would like to see made bold. So that again, if something pops out at students or parents, that they understand.
That's in that second, so it's the second paragraph after the personal communication devices. You read right at the end there, Kathy, that's what you're talking about, right? The first
full
big
paragraph.
paragraph.
Oh,
there.
right, yep, sorry,
Right at
first
the very
paragraph,
end.
yep, where it says use of PCD, yes, that's the one. We thought we would like to see that also made bold. So again, we're not changing wording, we're just changing, things that we'd like to highlight. Because that is definitely, an issue. Students are taking it out without it being approved by teachers, and then you get some teachers approving it, and then students still have them out. So we just want to make sure that students really understand that and really read that through. So that was a suggestion also that be made bold.
just the words used to be, or did you just clarify?
Yeah, it's the same
So-
wording, it's
alright.
just that we would make it bold.
Okay.
That's okay?
I'm fine with it.
Okay. Good? Yeah, okay. He's doing that. Okay, and then, there's a little bit of, I don't want to say controversy, it's not the right word, but some people seeing some things differently. There are some, administrators who felt as though they don't have to be powered off, but needed to be in lockers. They'd like to see them on so that students have easy access to them. And I'm gonna throw in my personal thing here. I have an issue with that just because I can only imagine that if all these cell phones are in lockers and out of sight, but they're not powered off, we're gonna hear dings and ding-a-lings and, phone calling as we go through the halls, like they'll be going off throughout the day. And I think that would be an issue and be very disturbing. and a distraction. So I think it should be powered off, but that was just me personally. Part of the point they were trying to make is that they are able to go and have them at lunch. Sometimes it takes a long time to power up.
Yeah, I don't.
No, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to highlight a point that an administrator talked to me personally about, and I wanted to clarify what this policy says. It says the district administrator and building principals are authorized to determine other specific locations and situations where use of PCD is absolutely prohibited. So what I'm trying to say, as a district policy, this can be, I feel that this is very freedom oriented for the student. However, if the principal or the district administrator, superintendent feels that our middle schools are having problems with children having their phones on at lunchtime, we are giving the authority to the principals of that facility to make determinations if they don't want any phones allowed at lunchtime. That's the spirit that I'm reading it. Does everybody agree with that, or does somebody have a different interpretation of that? Right?
No,
It's the last sentence of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th line.
That's all I read.
That's how it is.
Yeah.
That's how I interpret it, yes.
Okay.
That's what we're doing, so.
So I think with that, then we are kind of like giving everyone what they wanted, as long as we have that explained, that we're giving some of that latitude to the principals to decide if they're having issues, like you said.
I think every facility is different.
Yeah.
So high school is different than middle school, elementary school is different than high school. So that's why we empower our principals to make decisions that are best in their buildings. So that's where I feel that if we are on the safe side of letting children that are more mature have their phones at lunch, and then if it does become a problem, the only thing I'm concerned about is if the principal needs more backing besides a district policy that's a little bit too lenient. Was that brought up through your administrative conversations? In ad hoc? No?
No.
Okay.
One of the things that we did bring up though, and I do believe that it's covered here, are students with IEPs and sometimes there are medical reasons too. So students with IEPs and some with medical needs do use their phones. Like some of them have apps, say for diabetes, that alarms them that something's going on. But I think that those would automatically fall under the teacher / admin. And even if you say admin, it could be nurse, it could be our nursing staff. I mean, that's automatically, I think, included in those. Like, there are circumstances that we have to allow them.
They're typically, in those situations, I believe, part of health plans, and so you're
Yeah.
right, then that it's somewhat under the administrative umbrella because a nurse would be putting together that formal health.
Right. And I think one of the keys to this too is the, it's in the second paragraph, last line, is just the use of a PCD to engage in non-educational related communications is expressly prohibited. And maybe that should be bold also, because that alone says a lot, right? Like, it means you're not on there for social media. You're not on there for, videotaping something that you shouldn't be videotaping. I mean, this is all about, you're in school to be educated, it's for an educational use only. It's different when you're in your free time at your lunch and then you want to text a friend or check in with mom. That kind of thing.
Where's that one at?
The second paragraph is just the last sentence that says the use of it. I guess that would be the whole paragraph almost, that's emboldened. The use of a PCD to engage in non-educational related communications is expressly prohibited. Thoughts or feelings about that?
No, I think that's bold and it's fine.
Okay.
And to Mr. Phipp's point, Pam and I are keeping track of not only the policies that are being approved, but how they're different. And we'll communicate that out to building leaders before the start of the year and give them a space to ask questions and make sure they understand. So,
Okay.
that's part of our plan.
It's important to remember too, as much as we're doing this policy work, that it doesn't mean it can't be revised again if something's not working for us as a district. So, it's just a process then that we would have to go through But this is also a starting point, and the cell phone policy is definitely one that had to be addressed.
I'd like to just summarize, if I may.
Yeah.
We are going to bold that one sentence about no expectation of confidentiality. And in addition to bolding where it is, we're going to move it to under that kind of definition of what a PCD is, and bold it there.
Mhm.
The last sentence, what I'm considering really the first paragraph, the use of PCDs except those approved, will be bolded. And then the next paragraph, ending with that sentence, the use of PCD to engage in non-educational will also be bolded.
Yeah.
So over here.
Is everyone okay with that?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Matthew, you are
I
too?
just, yeah, I'm fine with that. The only thing I want to clarify is that we can make policies, but if the principal needs law enforcement reinforcement for a problem or confiscation, an officer is not going to confiscate personal property unless it's under the scope of like endangering safety or something. So they're not going to just, if we make a policy, the police aren't going to follow our policies. What I'm trying to clarify
Right.
to the community. So that's where we have to be diligent about being realistic. So, and as long as the administrators know that they can come to the superintendent, or if they need to come to the board eventually, if there's another problem, you know, that we can resolve it if we need to be more, I don't want to say strict, but. that's
We
kind of-
endorse it.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of where- so, yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Jim, how do you feel about it?
I'm
You're
going
good?
good.
Okay. I mean, essentially, we're keeping the same wording, we're just repeating one sentence and making some others bold. There was some commentary, just so you know, too, that like with elementary, they didn't want them to have cell phones like used at all during the day, but again, I think that kind of becomes a principal thing. And there's very few elementary students who really even have cell phones. And they certainly need them, there's a group who needs them like before and after school to pick up and drop off, that kind of thing. So I think, again, that kind of becomes more of a principal choice.
We're giving the principal the latitude to make the best decision for that facility.
Right. So I guess I'll just do the motion because I think we should. Do we have a motion then, moving forward with the PCD policy, moving on to the board for another first read?
I'll make the motion.
Is that first read or adoption?
First read, because we.
Oh,
We
well,
have
we
a
really
first
didn't-
read.
Oh, no.
I thought it was, we only needed
Because
the
there-
first and second read.
Well, if you had a first read, you're opening up for revision, and that's review, you know,
So
to,
the second read.
I'm thinking, you know, this would really move into the second read adoption mode.
Especially since we're not changing any of the wording, we're only adding the
Right.
same sentence second and then we're making it bold, so.
But you're making clarification, this is where we left off, and now additional stuff, you know, has come up, and
Yeah, that's how I thought it went too, but I've never been in this position.
The only technical edit we did is we added, started this over again, so that is a technical edit, that's whatever. It's fine.
Whatever the team's
The
comfortable
superintendent has
with.
the authority to make changes.
So if we're comfortable with calling the second read, what we'll do is just add a fourth column to that document and just show them the edits compared to the first read, and then we'll call it second read if the team's comfortable with that.
I'm comfortable with that.
I'm comfortable. I'm good.
Tony did a motion, I don't know.
I'll second the motion to
Okay.
make this a second reading.
All right, and then all in favor, say aye.
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 And bring it to full.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
If I could just add real quick, I just wanted to personally say thank you to the administrators and the community members that reached out to help, you know, provide input on this policy. So I think at the end of the day, we all want to get it right, so.
Yeah.
I appreciate the feedback and glad that we're able to, you know, find something that works for everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Thank you for saying thank you. All right, so that's that one. Give me a moment to readjust here. I think the next one then is our policy 2240, which is controversial issues in the classroom. Once again, we're talking about, this is I think our third time we're bringing this up. And to fill Jim in a little bit more, part of why we keep bringing it up is, again, we want to make sure we have it right, and we know it can be a long and lengthy conversation, so we just keep trying to bring it forward in bits and pieces to talk about. So So does anyone want to start off with, I think where we left off last time? I had notes about that. Do you guys remember where we started off or where we ended?
I believe, Kathy, did you want a hard copy?
I have one, thank you. I think this is the current one.
I think we made, on the second page, there was a question, there was an opportunity to select or not select. That sentence there, the classroom should not be used as a forum of discussion for district employment issues. We agreed that that would be selected. But any options or opportunities for selection on page 1, we did not.
Yeah, that's the one we didn't get through.
So I have this working copy from last time. And so I think we're at the sentence starting when controversial issues have not been specified.
Mhm. So just to read the whole sentence, it says when, and then for those of you watching or who are out here, when controversial issues have not been specified in the course of study, the board will permit the instructional use of only those issues which, and we have 5 choices to make. 1 is have been approved by the district administrator. 2 is who shall report periodically such approval to the board for their review or be part of that. Another was have been approved by the either principal or department head. So that's at the point we're at right now. Anyone want to start the conversation?
I just would start by saying that the current policy that's put on our website approved some point around 2008.
Yeah, 2008, last time.
The current state of the union says approved by the superintendent who shall report periodically such approval to the board for their review. So the first 2 is what we currently have.
Yeah, and I guess out of those 4, personally, I would stick with those 2 before I would go to principal or department head. I feel like there's a little more flow through to the board so that we understand what's going on and more consistency then throughout the entire district instead of having, you don't know which building is being taught what, so it allows for more of an overall direction for our district.
I'm fine with that. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. So are we saying we would have been approved by the district administrator and also include who shall report periodically such approval to the board for their review?
Which we
Both
have
of
right
those?
now.
Which is what we have, but we do still need to address it
Right.
because it hasn't been revised since 2008. So.
And essentially what they're suggesting is keeping the same or do this other one.
Okay.
Good.
So- Now, did we get to, in a discussion of any controversial issues in the classroom or in the course of professional duties, a teacher, I think we still have to address that, don't we?
Yes.
Okay, so a teacher either may not express a personal opinion, or another option was may express a personal opinion but shall identify it as such and must not express such an opinion for the purposes of persuading students to his or her own point of view. And also additionally, it says and may only express a personal opinion after student discussions have concluded. And we'll just kind of leave it at that point. I think with the remaining one that we have to decide on.
The starting point again, the current policy reads, as it relates to this option here, a teacher may express a personal opinion, but shall identify it as such and must not express such an opinion for the purpose of persuading students to his or her point of view. That's what's up here.
Okay. I think if teachers are going to be expressing their opinions, doing it after student discussion has concluded is awkward. I guess if I were, like, how do you have an end to it and be like, well, this is how I feel now? I think that would be, a teacher would have to decide that, what the natural flow of that would be. That's how I think it makes sense.
I talked to a lot of previous teachers that I had, and I found, and I listened, obviously, in the last board meeting, to public input very intently, and there was a reoccurring theme that kind of kept coming back to me in a circular motion, was that the educators that were doing their due diligence to their best ability would try not to engage with giving their personal opinion. And I like the second option in the merit of the words on the page. However, I don't know in practice it's as easy to follow. So I kept referring back to the educators that I had, that I didn't know what they were really believing. They were presenting the information and letting me become a critical problem solver myself, and discover my own opinions without trying to interject their personal opinion. Even if it was policy or not, they were still trying to be non-biased. So I am changing a little bit how I thought last time. I didn't have my mind made up at all. I just wanted to really discuss it, and I think we really did. And it's weighed heavy on me for the last month of thinking about this. So in the spirit of having our children not be persuaded, I think that we should just eliminate the possibility of somebody trying to accidentally interject their own personal opinions. And I know what that means. I just don't understand how we can differentiate it a little bit in the current climate of what's going on as much. So I think if we just eliminate it as a potential problem, I think it might be best to own it right now.
So are you saying you want to mean that, put on there that they may not express a personal opinion?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking at this moment.
I would agree with Matt on this one. And again, I'm citing my own experiences, growing up in public schools. When I look back at the teachers that I had, I can't recall any of them ever really expressing opinions on matters, right? And I think it's, even if they do it after the fact, or if it's not meant to persuade, I think at some level it's going to have some influence on the kid. A lot of kids look up to teachers, right? They're role models. They spend a lot of their days and time with them. And I think there's going to be some degree of influence there. And I think it's best, just to remain neutral on that. I think they should encourage critical thinking skills, but I'm not sure that I like the idea of them being able to weigh in with their opinions on controversial issues.
I don't think I agree with either of you on this one. I think that, one, we hire teachers as professionals to do their job, and we have to give them some latitude to make those conversations and decisions, and we have to have that level of trust with them. I think that, I understand where you're coming from, and there are certain issues that I think are in your minds that you're thinking of. But there are a lot of things that might be considered controversial that if a teacher helped a student through stuff, they help them get through life. It could be, what is a controversial issue? It could be something like college versus joining the workforce. And if I was a teacher and I had the ability to say, Kathy, you have this ability, I think you ought to go to college. So I think there's a really funky line there about what a controversial issue is. And we're kind of just saying we're not validating the personal opinions of our teachers. I don't feel that comfortable with it. And I will say, I wrote this down, which is part of why I have it next to me. Dina Larson spoke at our last public input, and I loved the quote. It was, "Answers give us knowledge and questions give us wisdom." It's about having that ability to ask questions and have them interact with teachers that make our students knowledgeable and decide who they are and how they go forward. So I don't really agree with that. I think our teachers need to have the ability to give opinions. Yeah,
You know what else Dina Larson said? That students didn't know what opinion was, right? So
Right.
it's, that to me says, and that's what I remember from my teachers, and again, I hear what you're saying, and I just don't, and frankly, like what you just said, I don't think it's that controversial. So I'm not even sure if it would fall in the policy.
No, I know, I was
That's
just
why
kind
we
of,
have to define controversial
Yeah.
issue. Because
Yeah.
in the spirit of what you're saying, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
That's why I want it to be, that's why for the purpose of this policy, a controversial issue is a topic of which opposing views have promulgated by responsible opinions across both support and opposition in the community. I would say we're defining it, and we can define it more than if that's the point, but we're not trying to, the discussion can still happen. We encourage discussion. And it's approved by the curriculum or the superintendent and then periodically through the board. But it's the one step a little bit that we're flirting with sin a little too much is what I'm just trying to introduce that if we tempt the teacher, instead of tempting the teacher, let's just remove that problem from the temptation from the teacher. And on a controversial issue, only on a controversial, let's stick to the basics of what is important for that child, of learning, growing, and developing, and asking questions. They can ask if we want them, we encourage them to ask questions. It's just we don't want them to be, obviously, what we wrote here, indoctrinated or persuaded students on a particular point of view. We want to encourage open-mindedness. So, and the discussion is okay. That's unless they want to opt out, obviously, that would be a different thing that we already have policy for, but that would be a different issue as well. I'm trying to separate because I know it's very intertwined. So we have to define controversial issue correctly. So are we comfortable with the definition?
and where is that? Was that next?
Well, no, it was before it, obviously. So properly introduced and conducted, the consideration of such issues can help students learn and identify important issues, explore both sides of an issue, weigh carefully the values and factors. So we're not trying to develop critical, thinking. I'm just reading what the policy is. So for this, I can read it again, but that's what we have to. We don't want to lose the heart of education. We just don't want to get into the weeds too much. And that's where I'm at the moment because of the state that we are in right now of people trying to find identity, the state of how people fulfill their identities through expression, for example. And I'm not saying a teacher would do this, I'm saying that people find more value expressing themselves than ever before. So to take the temptation away is probably a better solution than to eliminate the conversation. I don't want to eliminate the conversation, I just want to remove the temptation of a person to try to sway a child on controversial issues.
It's hard though, guys, is that we're being asked to, like, if that was true, and we're saying may not express a personal opinion, that's what we're doing right now as board members. It's not about, and this is a controversial issue. So we're expressing our personal opinions right now. So how do we take that away from our teachers?
Well, they're at work. Frankly, like, when you're at work, you're paid to do something. It's not like we're saying you can't have an opinion. Like, they can have an opinion. We're just saying, hey, while you're at work, you should be working. If let me give you an example. If I go to the checkout counter at Piggly Wiggly, and I'm there to buy bread, and I'm checking out, and the employee starts talking to me about their opinions on something I don't really want to talk about, it's not appropriate, right? And in a lot of cases, the employers won't allow that, right? So I think as an employer, we, and as elected officials, as the government oversight body of the district, which employs 800 plus staff, whatever it is, I think that we have the ability to guide the policy that would say, hey, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. So I totally respect people's opinions. and they're certainly entitled to them, but, you know, when these people are, you know, spending a lot of time with the children in this community, you know, I'm just suggesting that you should consider that, you know, think this through thoroughly. And again, I'm just going back to my experience. Great public school experience, great teachers, you know, none of them that I recall ever really shared their opinions. I had no idea what their politics were. I had no idea anything. You know, they encourage critical thinking and they encourage conversation, and they're just, you know, good facilitators, right? That's really, they should, you know, that's the role of, in my opinion, a teacher. So
I'm playing devil's advocate here, but since you had that experience, I don't think that their opinions were eliminated or the ability to get that or not. You're just saying you had the experience in public schools that they never did, or if they did, you weren't aware of it. But do we take that away then from our teachers to make that decision for themselves as adults?
I just think the downside is not worth it, in my opinion. You know, I mean, you could see examples of this throughout our country. You know, I saw a picture on the internet the other day of a teacher in Wauwatosa with the cup, you know, that had what I consider to be a controversial issue. You know, talking about something sexually charged with minor kids. You know, to me, that's unacceptable. You know, the teacher's entitled to that opinion, and it's okay if they have that opinion. I just don't think it's appropriate to be, you know, sharing that in a workplace. So
I'll speak to one other side of it too. So the child in the classroom, their values might obviously be attacked by a teacher giving their opinion, their point of view on it. And that's an adult figure compared to a child, to a peer to a peer. So peer to a peer, Johnny says, Susie is saying that, you know, you believe something differently than me. That's a peer-to-peer communication. That's what we want. We want to strive for them to work their issues out and have a real conversation. But then when an authority figure of the teacher says, well, this is how I believe and this is what you should believe, that's where it's not peer-to-peer anymore. That conversation is now an authoritative conversation compared to a peer of developing. And then we're imposing, hypothetically, the teacher is imposing their views on a controversial issue onto a child that might be discriminating that child's views of their own views. So then you have an authoritative teacher discriminating the child's views, and nobody's there to enforce their protection. So that's where I'm seeing, if Johnny is a 10-year-old, and then you have an adult give their opinion, who's backing up Johnny in the classroom when it's 20-1? So that's where if we remove, and that's why in the spirit of this conversation right now, I would try to err on the side of protecting the teacher. And I understand I'm not trying to sell it, I'm just being honest that if we eliminate the possibility, and then I have life examples, which Tony does too, of good educators holding their tongue until maybe in a private session, but not from a standpoint of the educational classroom. That's where I'm at with this at the moment. I'm open to hearing more discussion about it from anybody that's on, including our superintendent.
Jim, did you want to weigh in on this at all?
Well, again,
You don't have to, I don't want to
we're
do
coming
that.
down with opinions, and I typically am not one to incline to say that we should be sharing our opinions, because I think it can influence, even if that's not intended, just by our nature or our position or how we might be respected or acknowledged by it. At the same time, I think I'd have to go back to Matt in terms of, we're assuming that we're on the same page in terms of what that controversial issue might be, that we would be able to see, but without really defining what controversial issue is. There's probably gray area that we're running up to. That one would say, is that controversial or is that just discussion? I mean, I don't want to make it big, you know, there's some controversial issues we would all quickly identify. That's not the place in the classroom.
So, thinking out loud, you know, maybe we should clarify, you know, what do we deem controversial if it's not clearly expressed here. maybe we should define that.
That gets tough though, because I think that it's, and I know I come back to ad hoc all the time, but you know, like when we're trying to discuss like behaviors and like we're just like listing so many behaviors, and then when you don't list them, where's, you know, then I think it's a loophole. You know, so do we just start listing like everything under the sun we can think of as a controversial issue?
Well, if you want teachers to have the ability to weigh in on opinions, I think that, I think we need to find that, otherwise it's kind of great. Right? You know, like what you said earlier, to me, was not controversial, that was just, hey, can I
Yeah,
get some
it's
advice?
just, I know about it.
You know, but like the example I gave is, you know, I wouldn't want teachers in our district talking to kids about, you know, sexually charged issues. That to me is totally inappropriate in the public school setting.
But what if it was someone who actually felt conservative about that and gave their opinion to that student? Is that wrong?
I would argue, yeah, be neutral, like, so I would say.
I'm just being devil's advocate,
No, no,
just,
I
you know,
understand.
I don't want
And
I don't want
that's-
anyone
this is good,
thinking,
right?
you know, but I just feel like it's a sensitive part of the conversation, so.
Right, no, that's
We've gone
fair,
through on both sides.
and thank you for raising that point, that's a fair point, a valid point. You know, I think that at the end of the day, you know, we just need to, in my opinion, you know, direct the focus back towards education, you know, understanding that there may be controversial issues that come up in the course of discussion in a classroom setting. But in my opinion, again, just knowing that teachers can have a lot of influence on children and their thinking, you know, if they think a certain way and they reveal that to a child, that could be very impressionable to that young child. And I'm not sure that we necessarily want that in our community. So I'm not saying the teachers can't have these opinions, you know, one way or the other, right? We may agree or disagree, but I'm just saying, you know, teach the kids how to think critically, teach them how to read and write, and let's get really good at that.
Yeah.
And let's leave the controversial stuff. You know, frankly, like I just, yeah, I think we just need to focus more on the basics. And that's the direction that I would encourage us to move. And just looking at what's controversial, you know, I think we should clearly define that if there's any gray area. I mean, for me personally, you know, anything related to, you know, sexualization of minor children, you know, any topics talking about sexuality, gender identity, gender pronouns, these issues, in my opinion, should not be in the public schools. And I think we can love and care about and welcome all the students in our community without necessarily spending a lot of, or really any time talking about this. You know, again, these are minor children. You know, and I brought this up at one of our last meetings. I had a citizen reach out to me, the kid was in summer school. You know, I think he was like 9, 10 years old. And, you know, the first day of class, she's talking about Pride Week and how she's teacher's married to a woman. You know, she's a woman, you know, and I'm okay with that. But I just, again, is that really necessary to bring up in school? You know, I didn't know who my teacher slept with. You know, they didn't talk about it. So again, I'm not saying that they can't do that. I'm just saying, I'm not sure that's an appropriate conversation to have in a public school setting.
But I think we're talking about two different things right now, because you're talking about like not bringing up any controversial issues in the school. And right now, we're specifically talking about if there is a controversial issue, whether or not a teacher can express her opinion,
Well, we were,
which is, yeah, I know, I kind of went along with it, but that is a separate thing from what we're.
and then we just got to define what the controversial issues are. You know, there's other stuff. I talked about a little bit about issues relating to sexuality that I think are really not the role of public schools to be dealing with. You know, but also we should consider, you know, just some of the identity-based things that we've seen happen before, right? Like the whole Darude thing. You know, again, I'm not saying you can't have discussion on it, but you know, I'm not sure if I agree with teachers voicing their opinion on that, when I think that ultimately we really need to be focusing all of our energy on academics.
As we think about, this option here, Mr. Phipps has talked about, the best teachers, and how he mentioned that. And what I think about is that we task our professionals with a great number of expectations. That we talk about understanding 237 pages of standards and processing that. And one of the key things one of the priority tasks that we expect from our professionals is to build relationships. The research would support that, those relationships and expectations of achievement impact learning. And so, as we think about which one of these we select here, if we say may not, I just wonder about the relationship that we expect teachers to have with their students. And in a discussion on a topic, if a professional comes to a point where one or more students ask their opinion, for the teacher's opinion, we're saying that the teacher would not be allowed to give an unbiased opinion. And so I just wonder, again, what that does to what I think is a foundational task that we really charge our professionals with, is building relationships.
I completely agree with building relationships. I just don't want to build relationships on controversial issues. I want to build relationships on reading, writing, arithmetic, problem solving. I agree with you. It's just, I don't agree with how we're fielding the conversation. I don't want to take this out of context, but this is the parable I thought of real quick. I don't go out after midnight anymore as an adult, because, I mean, I do once in a while, but normally my parents or my coach would say, Phipps, don't go out after midnight. It's probably a bad idea, Go to dinner or whatever, have fun, but be home by midnight, because nothing's good is going to happen after midnight. So what I'm saying is, that's where controversial issues are not building relationships with teachers. Like, I don't want to build a foundation of relationship with a teacher on their political views, or their social or economical or religious views. I just don't. I want to build my relationship on the character that they have. How many times they've said, hey, you're doing your homework, thank you for being here on time, you're diligent, you're a hard worker. Those are the relationships that I want to build with my students or teachers. It's not on, that's where we can't have everything in all aspects of it. So I agree with you mainly. It's just I don't agree with trying to lump it all together. So we have a policy on controversial issues, and then the anonymity of protecting the teacher, saying, well, I'm not going to give my opinion. That helps them as well if they don't really want to be called out on something. So that's another aspect as well. So I'm not saying that's a perfect argument. I'm just saying that gives them the freedom to opt out of having to abide by what the students ask for. So that's.
And it is important to note that we're not saying they can never express a personal opinion either. This is solely about controversial issues.
Correct. Right. And if it's in the course of study, that's not a controversial issue. So if it's approved by the curriculum in a health class, there's a gray area there. So if it's in health class and they're talking about something and it's in the curriculum, that's not a controversial issue because it's in the curriculum. So that doesn't fall under this policy. Okay, so that, to be clear, this is only for controversial issues that don't fall within the scope of the curriculum already approved by the board or the superintendent. So that's another point that I made. So I'm not trying to restrict the conversations of teachers. I'm trying to, if nothing, protect them in their anonymity, and also protecting students that need a voice in the classroom that may be offended by a teacher or an authority figure giving their opinion when it's against their belief system. That's all I'm trying to say.
I appreciate the conversation. I just want to clarify that I was not promoting that controversial issues would build relationships.
Okay.
Right. I was saying that I wonder
You won.
if a conversation was occurring and one or more students asked the teacher to express their opinion because they were interested, what that might do to the relationship. So certainly not promoting sharing controversial opinions as a way to build relationships. That's not what I was.
And I agree, I want a teacher to give their position on something, as long as it's within the scope of the curriculum that doesn't fall under this policy.
Here's an example for you though. I mean, what happens when you have, and I say when you have, because this has happened. This is a real situation. And I don't want to pick on middle school, but that's where it happened. So, you have a student you built a relationship with, and they come to you and they say, Mrs. Willis, no one knows this, not even my parents, but I'm a lesbian. Well, I'm sorry, honey, I can't give you an opinion, darling.
That's that.
Like, what happens there? What happens with that?
As a loving person, I would say, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with you saying that you're.
Is it? Oh, but is that giving you an opinion? That's part of where I'm going with it. Like, where does it fall?
And you're right. You direct them to have a conversation with the counselor, but you can still have sympathy for a person of any choice, if it's good or bad. I'm not saying if that particular instance. I'm saying if they are having feelings of anger or something, that would social. So if that would fall under if they have social issues. I'm feeling nervous around people in a small room, and there's too many kids around. So then that's where you would have a conversation with them and direct them to somebody that can help them. As long as we're in the spirit of well-being, and what Jason referred to as if it's a conversation within 3 students. So there's kind of a rule where if it's a conversation with a class or if it's a peer one-on-one, that's kind of another issue that's a private conversation compared to a topic that was brought up in the classroom. So, that's where I'm not trying to say that a teacher can't have a conversation with a student after class by themselves. That's between them. That's the professionalism. Well, maybe now's not the best time to talk about this. Miss Kathy, let's talk about this after class, just me and you. So that's where the freedom is still there. Just you don't want to interject in an authority setting of a whole class.
So we're talking about more like instruction.
Yeah, I mean, in the spirit of this, in this context, that instructional goals of the course of study and the level. So yeah, I mean, so.
I just worry about them. So there's controversial issues. There's only so many of them, really. I mean, I said we could list a lot of them, but there's still so many. And then there's a group of students, though, who may not have their needs met anywhere else, who the only person who they're comfortable reaching out to is the teacher. And I certainly want those students to have that ability, or that teacher to have that conversation with, or the ability for them to converse. I wouldn't want to take that away, because and I think of middle school most, because middle school is such a quirky age. They're dealing with all kinds of those things. So, I just want those students to be able to turn to somebody that they see as an important part of their life if they need to do that. And I don't want to hinder our teachers from having that ability to have that relationship.
So in the discussion of any controversial issue in the classroom or in the course of professional duties, so that would kind of fall under.
It would be in the school.
Yeah, so
you're
I would be
saying
incorrect with that
It's
statement.
not just a classroom, it's,
It would be
a
in your
teacher,
duty as that is a.
That they
teacher or staff member, when you're on school property, you're taking on, in the building, you're taking on a professional role. I mean, teachers are responsible for how kids behave in classroom, the hallways, so it's all part of the learning environment.
So you are saying the opposite thing though right now, because Matthew is saying like, well, if it's an instructional time, learning classroom environment, you're saying.
I'm just saying instructional time can happen in the hall.
You're saying it can be any time. So then if that student came to you and the hallway after school. You're saying, according to this policy, no, they can't have that conversation.
There's one thing about thinking about the welfare of a child when the child might be bringing a concern
Right.
to including their identity or whatever in terms of how you manage that, because you obviously would not want to do anything to disrupt the mental health of that
Right.
student in terms of how they might view what you say. And I think we always have to be aware of. I mean, it's almost like you see something, say something, you know, if we think somebody is suicidal, you're going to be interested in terms of knowing, but there's a, you know, I think it's when we cross the line where what we might be doing is promoting something.
Right,
By the, you know, it's a very difficult one, you know, to really, and I'm drawing certain parallels even to a different context. I didn't need to have somebody list all these examples of you can't discriminate against. I just wouldn't want to discriminate against anybody.
right.
Okay, yet we listed them. Why? You know, for the same reason we're talking on the other side, it's a different type of a context. You know, we're trying to make sure that our intentions are known somehow by giving an example. But it's difficult. You know, these things are more new, but I always think one of our first priorities is the health and welfare of children, you know, in a protected learning environment. But there's one thing about, you know, being aware as a professional that child is healthy and there's not a concern to follow up on. And then to get into a conversation that, you know, if we're not medical doctors, if we're not, you know, somebody that they might with their family consult, there's a point in time where, personally, I don't feel it's our place, you know, to be in there, except for we do have to be aware, you know, that our children seem to be safe and that we're seeking assurances of that. You know, that's different than maybe carrying the conversation on into specifics. That's where other people might need to be involved, including parents, you know, where we might. But one has to be aware that I think we're, you know, if we see signs that there might be a concern, it would be our responsibility to make sure that we are wanting to know that our children are safe and we don't have to worry.
Obviously, if the well-being of the student is in question, health or safety, that's when it should be referred as professional. We refer that to a counselor, a grief counselor, or a parent, or you know, the channel that's appropriate. You know, so that would be the point that I wanted to make about what the student caused. I lost some.
Yeah, if I could just add real quick while Matt tries to get that. You know, maybe, and I get what you're saying, Kathy, I'm not discounting the possibility that there may be a circumstance where a child does feel that way and does feel that, you know, hey, the only person I really trust is my teacher, right? And that's the case, then, you know, maybe we just reconsider what to do in those situations and not necessarily craft a policy just for that specific scenario, right? Because I would, you know, again, maybe I'm wrong, but you know, what I'm trying to avoid is unnecessary, what I feel amounts to unnecessary conversations with minor children around topics that I think are inappropriate in a school setting. And I'm not discounting the possibility of what you suggested as could happen, but I just don't know if that's what happens most of the time or you know, if at all in our district. You know, maybe it does, and maybe it doesn't, but I would think in most circumstances, you know, my thoughts are if that conversation does happen, you know, direct the child to, have you talked to mom and dad about this? You know, have you talked to mom and dad? And again, I think that would always, for controversial issues, I think that's really the best source to go to. And if the answer then becomes, well, hey, mom and dad aren't an option, then we could discuss that. How do we handle that situation? right? Because they're really kind of different situations, right? But if you have engaged parents, I would think that they would probably want to be involved in those conversations.
I remember my point now. What if we, just the devil's advocate, what if we would have, may not express a personal opinion in a classroom setting? So that's where then the educational side of it is not, then we're defining that as, I'm just trying to understand the full nature of what we're getting at here. So what I'm saying is that, like if there's a traumatic event and a teacher wants to talk to a student, or a student wants to talk to a coach or a teacher in that setting, their professional duty, that's gonna happen. I mean, we can write policy all day, it's gonna happen. And I don't want, I'm not gonna say that, I'm not gonna say it wouldn't happen. I'm saying that, the nature of this policy, I think, is to, not, indoctrinate or persuade students in a particular point of view, in a classroom setting. So
And I agree with that. I mean, as a parent, I would not want a teacher or other people persuading my kids about things that I have values about at home, right? The persuasive piece is part of it for me. I don't think that a teacher should be persuading, but I don't want to limit their ability to handle different situations, or for us to feel as though we don't trust them to do the right thing. And I get what you're saying though, by saying, well, it's kind of an out then too, to be able to say, maybe people aren't comfortable with some things too, and be able to say, that's not where I can go. So I see both sides, I see both kind of the full scope, I think. Pam, you wanted to say something before.
I just wanted to say, to your example, I think it's important to keep in mind that discussion of just general kind of social things is one thing, but I think it is important to keep in mind that we do have children in our school district who have identified in different ways, and their families are very supportive of that, and have asked for our staff members to be mindful and supportive of that as well. And so I think just, when we define what we're talking about in classrooms, I think it's an open discussion where students are talking about something and looking at all avenues and all sides is one thing. But when we're talking about the defined identity of some of our children, we have to be careful about how we limit teachers' ability to build that understanding and acceptance of the differences between children. Because that puts our teachers in a difficult position where they're going to violate someone's, they're going to have to violate that student's, right to be safe and a part of that classroom. And so it's hard, it's a difficult challenge because we want to respect and be open to everyone. And so, teachers facilitating conversations about openness and acceptance of all ideas is going to help benefit us across the board if we can make sure that we model all of that as well.
Although it's still not giving a person, that's what this is about, a personal opinion and about persuading.
And that's
But
what
I'm just trying to bring the
Bring it
flip
in a
side,
little
like
bit.
And that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I think we gotta be cautious about a teacher trying to say open to accepting all is not giving a personal opinion, because they're going to have to somehow build acceptance in classrooms of a variety of students' needs, differences, ways of living, all of those things. So I just, when we're talking about the class discussion and weighing in on there's this side or that side or this side or that side, that's different than a teacher who has to build a classroom culture where all students feel safe and belong is really what it amounts to.
I guess one last thing I wanted to talk about, was that as an educator in my position, I always wanted to be a mentor, a leader. I never wanted to be friends with my students because I was an adult, and I wanted to separate that always. And I found that students always wanted to be my friend. They always wanted to come and talk to me about other things. And I always, as a professional, I always wanted to provide that because I believe that, a teacher is a positive role model in somebody's life. And I'm speaking from examples, there's a positive role model that showed me how to model good behavior, how to have failures and have successes. And that relationship was that. It wasn't a friend coming to talk about what you're going to do more so as a peer, as a young man in that position. So I think we kind of get a little confused, or not a little confused, but we encourage a little bit too much of the relationship on the friend side compared to being a positive role model for them, the model as being a potential adult. So I just wanted to say that.
Well, guys, I guess my suggestion right now is we have made progress. We've had great conversation. We did make progress with choosing something. So if you're okay with this, it's almost it's after 6:45. I'd say let's go home and chew on it a while and bring it up again and see if we can readdress this after all the conversation that we've had. Think about it some more and talk about the specific area next time, if you're okay with that.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, Matthew, how do you feel about it?
Um,
I know you haven't done it all over.
I want to move on, but that's fine. I'm okay with that. I would love to hear the input from the public and.
Yeah, I guess that's how I'm feeling too.
That'll be fine. So that's in the spirit of everybody having an opinion. At the same time, we are charged to do jobs, so that's what I'm gonna try to do. So I'm okay with, tabling it, and moving forward, and I hope, we can continue to move conversation about it.
Yeah, so you guys, the directive is to make sure, please, that this is on our agenda again, and we'll readdress the specific, might be any part of it, but we made a lot of choices. I think this is our final choice to make, so, let's put that on the agenda for the next time we meet.
It's a great segue to schedule on that.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Yes. So, I'll hand that over to you.
We have traditionally been, for the last several times, I think the third Tuesday. And so I wonder two things. One is, do we want to schedule one meeting, or do we want to systematize this and say every third Tuesday? I think that's the second one.
I'm okay doing it once a month. If you guys are, or just every month we can just schedule it, right? This one.
I think that's what he said.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, things change, so, I mean, I would love to say, but I don't want to cancel, so. I don't see a problem with that. I mean, unless, for viewing purposes, that would, if we can systematically say we're gonna do it, that would help. But I'm okay with just once. We can try to shoot for that. Let's, as a bullet point, we try to shoot for the third Tuesday. It's fine.
It's fine. We can, and then if something comes up, then we could just, as long as there's flexibility.
One of the things I think, that of interest to staff is just making sure that when they work their own calendars, too, they're just trying to make sure that they're available. So,
Yeah.
But again, if we kind of look for a given date as the first date, that's still a step in that direction. But some of this is, I know that my staff feel responsible for helping facilitate, and it's just more people that you're trying to coordinate.
Right.
Not that you wouldn't say, okay, it's not good for them, we'll have to put it another day.
Yeah.
And then it's just a little bit more process, but that's,
I was worried about August, but I'm okay with it, so I'm good with all of those for now.
So I'll send an invite as a starting point for the third Tuesday. And again, if something comes up in February and we need to change it, we'll do that. But we'll start with third Tuesday. And the next one would be August 16th, and then we'll just have that reoccurring. And wondering about the start time. Does 5 o'clock work?
Yeah, works for me.
and again, I would say that we're very open to making adjustments, but even not only staff, public, when public starts understanding that there's a potentially routine of when you're having certain things, they become more familiar and they're not always checked off.
Yeah.
So,
Is there a possibility, not in the near future, but that scheduling could be earlier? Something to think about. We don't have to decide that now, but I have conflicts on Tuesdays.
That's why I'd be open to changing the day, because I'm kind of seeing, but that's where like them months, or we could try to go to Wednesdays.
Yeah, so I know for the next 3 months I'm fine, but it's after that I may have issues.
So I'm good for the next 3 months.
We just do that for now, for the next 3 months.
5
Is that
p.m.,
okay?
third Tuesday, and someone in the group will be the accountability person to say, a couple months, let's redo that.
Okay, yeah.
So what I want to do is,
That works. So at least for August, September, October, we're okay. Okay.
for note-taking and preparation purposes, I'd like to just review, summarize here. We are going to move forward the math and financial accounting books to the full board for the next meeting. We will put a note in the minutes regarding electronic access. We're going to move forward the academic standards. Policy 5136, we will move forward for the second read and make that fourth column in and make the revision.
And just for clarification, second reading and adoption,
Yes.
Yes.
okay,
Thanks.
just to make sure that we,
And we'll put the minutes that we had great discussions about policy 2240, but we're going to table it for now, bring it back on August 16th, and then I will send the invite for that, those meetings.
Perfect. Yep. All right, with that, guys, I seek a motion to adjourn, please. All
To adjourn.
Second.
right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you so much, guys. We made headway, and that's clear. I want to thank you. And if we can ending music or something, before we start, while we end, we could just use some tunes. It's weird, quiet in here.
I don't know why when you said that, I started thinking it was a family music.